Sweet. Oh, and my green screen. So sad. So this is what happens, ladies and gentlemen, when you have 3 children and you work and your wife works and it's the last day of school. And that's what happens because today's the last day of school here in the old Ciudad de Mexico, at least for my kids. And so there you go. And I have a 5th grader going into 6th grade and an 8th grader going into 9th grade. And so there's all these events and ceremonies and it's absolutely crazy. Welcome. But it's all done today. We're all done now. So hello, Amy, Tessitore. Welcome to office hours. How are you today?
Thank you. I'm doing well. I'm jealous that it's your last day of school. We have another 2 weeks to go.
It's interesting because many of the schools here also have a couple more weeks. The government of Mexico required some, I think it's the public school system and then other schools that they have to stay in for 2 more weeks because of missed time because of COVID and stuff like that. Right. I don't know why we got out, but I'm not questioning
it. Don't ask.
Yeah. But summer school starts on Monday. Yeah, summer camps. Anywho, Chris, take us away. What are we doing today?
Hi everyone. Hi Amy. Well, since we have Amy here, I thought it would be fun to just explain to Amy what we're trying to accomplish here.
It's probably a good idea.
I would love it if you take the credit on that one. And then we'll try to start building the course. So I have the OpenLMS site here ready to be filled. I haven't filled anything just to stay true to our purpose. And then I have, there is something that I think is worth sharing, and it's Amy's quick tips, which she wrote kind of specifically for this session. A couple of questions that I think are worth answering, you and me. Mm-hmm. And we can let Amy tell us if we are doing it right or not.
Well, super cool. Let's bring Amy up to speed then.
All right.
So, Amy, we have, this is now probably 2 months old, but Chris had the brilliant idea of let's build a course live and, in real time here. And by real time, it's like a real slow roll because Chris and I have never built a course before, especially not an open LMS. And so we've gone through the process of rummaging around topics. We actually took our question to the open LMS community and staff and said, what should we create, or what kind of course should we create? And as you can see, Chris typing in here. Chris, you can't go ahead, bud, because we got to explain what you're doing and why you're doing it.
Just put that
in. Basically, I want to say Juan or someone in our company, he said, why don't you do something around the World Cup, because the World Cup is happening this year in Qatar, et cetera, et cetera. And so we went through all these other options, all these sort of thoughts about what could we talk about in the World Cup. And we have decided on this topic of how do you win the World Cup? And what we mean by that is we want to take the last 5 World Cups and we want to look at it, each of those 5 World Cups from, I think it's 4 or 5 different dimensions of, where it was hosted, the economics behind it, the technology available, these kinds of things, and see if we can come up with either a shared reason or some thread or some story that we could say, here is what the factors are for you to win the World Cup. Is it like having some superstar? Is it having a great coach? Like, what's the factor or the factors? And so, we have hemmed and hawed around this a lot now. And so we need to bring somebody in who actually knows what they're doing, which is you. And so that's where we're at. And so we need you to disabuse us of whatever we're talking about. Ooh, I love it. Mark Perry's here. Look at that. Hey, Mark, good to see you. For everyone who doesn't know, Mark has been a speaker in the E-Learn Success Series or the Exec Success Summit twice. Fantastic instructional designer himself. So, Amy, what I've set the table, as we say in the Estados Unidos. How bad are we? How far off are we from actually starting to open up this open LMS and doing something real?
You are not far off at all, because what you've created here is a purpose for the course, which is the first thing. We have to have a reason. Why are we doing this? And this is one, not just how to win the World Cup, but you're also setting criteria. So you're helping your learners figure out how to navigate that criteria and evaluate it. So that's great. So we have a purpose there. And we have goals. We know what we want them to achieve. We want them to be able to look at this criteria and apply it not just to World Cup wins, but to any win. So when they come out, not only would they maybe know how to win the World Cup, but maybe they know how to win other types of world soccer or football events. But they also know how to use criteria and take that to evaluate a situation. So that's a goal that's achievable and it's measurable. So you have purpose and goals all set. So what comes next is really building the course, and that's where your sequence and your interaction and things like that come in. So you have all of the foundation, the underpinnings, you're ready to start building.
Super cool. So what do we like? So in terms of this is where we left our last conversation off, which with sort of like, oh my Lord, what do we do now? Like what kind of interactions do we have? Like, so is it, should we build a self-paced course? Is this going to be a course that has peer learning in it? Is it going to be a cohort? Is it going to be, do we have an instructor coming in and, doing real time sort of synchronous learning? What do we have to map out there before we start really building stuff?
So before you can really start to build, you have to figure that out. What is the mode? Am I doing synchronous, semi-synchronous, completely self-paced? Is it going to be self-paced but over a period of time? Do I have to evaluate within a specific period of time? So you just have to pick one. This actual content would lend itself well to any of those. We could have a course that's monitored by a facilitator who jumps in every once in a while, but that's driven by social learning, where we have learners coming in a cohort. It's sort of self-paced, but they're in there interacting with each other and sharing ideas. Some of that is topic specific, right? So when we talk about anything sporting, sporting events, you can get people really involved, and they don't really need a facilitator to get that going. They start sharing, they start talking. It's one of those things that's kind of organically grows as far as social learning goes. But if we're going to have this course out there for people to enroll as time goes along, and we have rolling enrollments, and we wouldn't have that social aspect. So I think we first just have to determine, do we think the social aspect is critical to this course and what we want to build, or do we think it could be self-paced and people could have rolling enrollment? And once we answer that question, then we can decide what we want to build out.
Chris, what do you want to do?
Well, we actually discussed that last time around, and it's my idea, which of course is open to discussion, is where we have like a first phase where we want people to get acquainted with all of the things that we've discussed, like for the 5 past winners, who were the team, who were like the stars, who were the coach and the direction team, where were they playing, how big were the fan bases, how much money did anyone have, and so on. And this is all just information. So we think this first phase would be about just self-paced, maybe in a micro-learning format. And all of this, something that's still out in the open is what should students do with the information. And my idea is that people have like a plan or like a strategy, and they build like their own strategy for the upcoming World Cup. I'm not sure exactly what that entails, but it should reflect whatever they've been learning from that. So there would be like like a first phase of self-paced where people start learning about these topics and then start building their plan. And once everyone has achieved that phase, then we start a live social interaction where people sort of somehow, what's the word, put the plans sort of in a way to face each other.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe in some sports like analogy. And then maybe we could do that like in another segment, like another self-paced micro-learning item, and then another review. We could have many phases. But to round it up, I think the best way, it would be like a mixture of self-paced micro-learning and these live social interactions, which, as you point out, Amy, could be really engaging because of the subject.
Yeah, I think you could definitely accomplish this. In these courses, you have all of the tools to accomplish all of these things. From building out different lessons just to give people the baseline information, things like what are the positions and um, who are the coaches and what is their background. Some of that can just be text information, especially what are the different positions, maybe with some images. When it comes to coaches, maybe we have like a video segment that tells you about the different coaches. But you have a lot of tools that you can use within the course, a lot of resources and activities to make this a course that can be self-paced for part of it, but then also has some engaging pieces as well.
Is this something where would you recommend that we have, the next, whatever it is, 12 weeks planned out on a schedule before we go into the open LMS system and start building it? Like I've seen some people, kind of just dive in and start creating. I've seen some people like structure everything and then go build it. Like what's your recommendation for that?
So I am a big fan of backwards design theory, which means I always start at the end and I think, how do I want this to end up? How am I going to evaluate whether or not the learners have met the goals? And I usually come up with what my end assessment will be. For something like this, I would love to see people face off or get involved in maybe a live webinar where they're kind of like sportscasters debating the different things that went into the World Cup wins, what makes you most likely to win. For me, that might be a great end assessment where I could watch them and I could see and hear their thinking, and watch them engage with others and be able to articulate their viewpoint and their stance. If that's my end goal, I think, how do I get them there? And then I like to build out backwards. In this particular course, we have topics, and we don't have too many topics, which is perfect. We've really narrowed it down to some key factors. When you're designing in higher ed, sometimes you have a 16 or 20-week course, and you really want to map some things out ahead of time. I'm a big dry erase marker and a window person, and I like to map it all out that way, and then I can kind of look and rearrange. And I know others who do things on paper or they type it out in a Word document or use Post-its. But having a general structure and idea is important because we want to create the sequence. And the sequence is very important. And the sequence is important because we need to start off small. So as a now soccer mom, my youngest plays soccer. I never played this in my whole life. I still am trying to figure out the rules. I can't figure out the positions, right? So as I'm watching the game, I think to myself, like, I need some sort of tutorial that teaches me what the positions are, because then I could understand what the whole offside situation is, which I sort of picked up in last night's game. But see, that sequence becomes important. And that also plays into creating kind of like a scaffold, right? So I look at it like when I'm cooking or I have a recipe, I have to break that down into different ingredients. And that's what we're going to do with our course, is break out those different ingredients. They all come together to make a recipe at the end. But if I just tell you what the end product is, then it's a lot, right? If I just say, here's the recipe, just go make this. But if I start to explain the individual ingredients and how they interact with each other and why they're important for the next piece in the recipe, now I can make something really wonderful. It's also called chunking. So the ed term for it is chunking things. We break things up into small pieces, and then we let the learner reconstruct them. And that's what we do when we teach people to cook. We explain how to cut the ingredients and measure them and what they are, and then we let them combine them. There's a little bit of trial and error there. Sometimes you combine them in a way that works great, and sometimes the dish comes out terrible, even though it's the same ingredients. And so part of sequencing is also breaking things into chunks so that each piece builds upon the previous. So when I think about positions, I have to understand what the positions are in the game first, to also understand the coaching style, because coaching style is dependent upon positions and who's strong and why I'm going to utilize people in different positions. Money is important, but it also factors into some of the other things like teams and players and sponsorships and attendance and different marketing schemes that go into build things up so people want to come watch. And so each one of those builds on the next. And so as we're building, we want to think about how we're going to sequence things and how each next piece builds upon the previous piece.
So we've got these 5 pieces that we're going to look at. What would your recommendation be? Like, okay, so here's the last 5 World Cups. Let's first look at all of the coaches, and then kind of go through that, and then let's look at each of the star players in each of them. Or would it be, let's look at the year 2000, and then let's look at in it holistically, like what are the pros and cons of looking them in packages versus topics?
I would actually probably for this start with something even more basic. I would explain what the positions are, right, and what their titles are and what their role is, and then I would talk about who coaching. What is the coach's role? Is the coach's role to teach you while you're on the field, or is it the coach's role to teach you before you get there? Because that will become important when you evaluate coaching style later on to see what the different styles were of the coaches who actually won the World Cup. So I'd start with a very brief introduction, maybe some terminology for people who might be somewhat new. Obviously it's not a field, it's a pitch, and it's a match, not a game. These are all important so that when you are talking about it later on, you can talk the talk. Then I would do exactly what you're saying. And I would talk about, these are the 5 different World Cups we're going to evaluate, and we're going to critique them for these factors: coaching, team and player, money, things like that. And then I would break each of the World Cup down, each of those matches down, and see, how all of those factors played in. I think for something like World Cup, we have to decide, are we looking at the final match or the whole journey? Because if we look at the whole journey, we were in the pre-qualifiers, right? The qualifiers over this past weekend. And that's really important because that determines who moves forward, right? So there's so many aspects to something like World Cup because it goes on for a really long time as well.
Chris, Amy's put a lot on the table here. Like, do we have enough to take a next step, or what other questions do you have for
her? No, I'm just like starting to fill out all the things on the Open LMS side. So what I've been doing while Amy's talking is trying. I haven't been able to keep up with everything, but I have like the sections, and actually started with the last section. Okay, I think I got out of the course.
Now you're looking at the course.
Yeah, and so here are the sections. Okay, so I created the end first, but now we have the end before the first half. I'm sure we can rearrange this. Yeah. And then the first thing that I was going to create is maybe like a very short lesson on the coaches, which is like the first thing. Coaches. Yeah. So I have no idea who they are, but I can look it up really quickly while maybe we can discuss. I mean, I like Amy's questions on Amy's tips. So I'm wondering if you, Steven, have something to add or something that maybe we don't have quite as clear, you and me, on the purpose and the goals, all of it really.
I feel like we have some. I think we're fairly. We know what we're going to do. I think this is where I'm kind of trying to determine is I think we've gotten to a point in this where there's just some work that needs to be done, which is actually getting the content and sort of building that content. So for instance, what are the names of the coaches? And as Amy was talking about, maybe we need to come up with a couple of criteria about what do we need about each coach. Is it their age, their style, where are they from, blah blah blah, and so that we have the same information about each coach. Then you talk about what constitutes a star player, and then we'd have to figure that. So it seems to me right now that we're kind of at a place where we know that we're going to have some asynchronous portions of this. We're definitely going to have some kind of cohort where they get to a point where they will have to come together and discuss or put on the table what they've learned thus far. Maybe maybe a halfway check-in, and then at the end we come and we're going to assess their ability to review all of this data and then provide their own analysis about how do you win the World Cup. So we've got some midterm and then final assessment structure. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, it kind of feels like we actually have to go get some content.
Yeah, and what you'll do, exactly like you said, you want to create a coach profile, and you want that to be the same for every coach. So we're comparing the exact same information. Maybe age, years coaching, did they ever play? Where were they raised? Who were their coaches? Because sometimes we see that come through, or what was their style of play? So again, calling on my parental knowledge I've gained here, there are a couple of soccer camps here, summer camps for kids to go play soccer, football, and one of them is where they can learn the Liverpool way of playing, which meant absolutely nothing to me
I was just gonna
until.
say I don't know what that means.
Right.
What's that?
Don't know. My 11-year-old was like, "What do you mean you don't know? They have like a really distinct way and they're coaching and all these things." And I didn't know that, but it factors into things. Now, a player who plays for Liverpool and then also plays on the national team may play slightly differently or, have different type of discipline or style. So, and we see that in other places too. So in our house, there's a constant debate over Messi versus Ronaldo and who has which style and what it is that the kids admire more about each of them. And even thinking back to when I was younger, which will date me, like when we talked about Maradona and people would compare him to Pele and all of these things. Over time, people have different style, and that comes through in people's coaching style as well. So we have to create a profile and we have to say these are the things that we think are important to know about a coach. And we'll do the same when it comes to like location, right? So very similar to like with the Olympics, location matters, and the whole atmosphere, right down to what do we need to know about the location? Is it things like latitude and longitude, average temperature, the humidity, any factors that we think play in? And so we can start to template though, and we can say, okay, for location, we're going to have all this information. And for coach profile, we're going to present this. And maybe we want to have an image of each coach, or maybe we don't because we don't want people to be swayed by image when looking and choosing and how they think things play in. So we start to template and we say, this is the information I want for this. This is what I need for money. This is what I need for teams and players. And, these are the things that I'm going to look for. Your hardest one will be luck and risk management, risk assessment, because that's more subjective. What I think is risky, you may not think is risky when it comes to, laying it on the line to try to win the World Cup. So we'll have to be very careful about the criteria we set there. Once we template what we need, the information we need, we can start to think about how we'd like to present that to the learner. Are we going to make it all text-based? Is it going to be an image? Is it going to be for location? Maybe we make something that looks like a brochure or almost like a tourist type thing that has, all of the reasons you might come to play at that particular venue. But we can really start templating, and that's the key because that's what you're going to use to go get your information. Then once you have that, you can build your content.
Chris, we got to build some templates, bro.
Yeah. One question, because one thing that we've been discussing is we don't want to reinvent the wheel. We don't want to build content that maybe it's out there and it's probably has a higher quality. So we've been mentioning quite a few times OER, Open Educational Resources.
Yeah.
But I guess there's always this question of how do we sometimes the course is really good, and if you're not too just not much of a stickler, you can say, oh, the course as it is good enough. But if we're talking about templating, if we're talking about structuring a course in a way that makes sense for us, for this specific course, how what would be like the best way to approach OER, assuming that we find OER on this topic, which is a whole another thing.
Yeah. So, what I would do is I would define exactly what information you want first. I think that when you go and you look at like Creative Commons or other OER sources and resources out there, at a minimum, you'll be able to get the information you need so you don't have to spend so much time researching to find that information. You can still take OER and, resources and then bring them into your system and kind of dress them up however you want. So perhaps something is completely text based. It's an OER resource, it's all text, and you say, that's great, but I'd like to add some interaction on top of that or have some questions. I could put that into something like a lesson, or I could use something like H5P to create a more interactive and engaging experience, still using that same information. So It's really, when we talk about templating, it's about making sure we're presenting the same type of information. So same baseline indicators for coaches and for money and for location, so that people can make a good comparison. If we bring in different information and we don't template that, then they're not making same comparisons. So they're comparing criteria from one coach against very different criteria from another coach. But you can definitely get probably images of locations and descriptions and lots of the resources. So lots of imagery and video and things like that through OER resources.
Hot.
Yeah, awesome. um, okay, well, I think we have a very good first lesson for the coaches, and then yes, we'll have to try to get into all of this. And yeah, I mean, I can keep going with all the other topics.
Well, yeah. So I mean, we're gonna have to do the same thing with each of the 5 topics that we have for each of the 5 World Cups. And so, like I said, I think this is we're we've kind of come to a great place here where we validated our idea, we've got purpose, and we've got goals. We've got we haven't. The expert is now saying, look, you've got enough to actually start doing this, and now it's like we actually have to start doing it, which is creating these templates and giving ourselves so that we can actually compare apples to apples, as we like to say in the United States, and or at least our learners can compare apples to apples. And then we have to come up with how will we assess their ability to compare, and then their ability to analyze and present their findings to those things. So
yeah, and this is a good time to think too about which types of activities you'd like to build. So, in Crispin, to add something, you could see there's lots of things available in the activity chooser, and that's true no matter what LMS you use to build. You're going to have a variety of options. And that's activities. Resources is going to be things that doesn't require learner engagement back, but that we can put information out with. So a book, a file, folders, things like that. So we want to start thinking about what are the activities and resources we'd like to use. We have a lot available to us, but we don't want to use everything because we don't want people to have to learn how to navigate every single resource newly. So we want to pick a couple that we think could be high impact and fit our content well, and kind of drive what we're doing, give us an outcome that we're looking for. And then maybe pick like 4 or 5 different activity or resource types that we'll use consistently and repeatedly throughout the course.
Yeah. One thing, I don't see the database here, but I'm thinking that the database could be like a really great way for us to start building up all of this information, and the database itself can be a template. In fact, we can actually build a database preset, right? But I'm not sure why I don't see it here. Is it because
We
it's
might have to enable it on that site. So for our sites, sometimes we can turn certain things on or off. Database is probably one of those options. It's one of the more underutilized activity types. I think people hear database and they immediately start thinking Microsoft Access, and they're immediately like they don't want to use it. So I think if we just enable that, and it's exactly what you said, you create a template as the teacher or the course builder that instructs people what information to put in. When they put it in, we now have a collection of information about whatever we'd like. And we can include things like text, URLs, images, all types of things in the database.
Yeah, I love databases. Hopefully I'm not alone here.
I'm thinking that the people who are going to show up to talk about who win the World Cup, some of them will, but I'm not so sure we're going to get a whole lot of database passionate talking. So we'll see.
I mean, I don't know. Like what I've been realizing is that soccer and I guess most sports have these lots of trivia. So if we help people gathering all this, maybe
stats, babe.
Stats.
Yeah.
I was just going to say.
Yeah, lots of stats, and that's all data, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
Yeah.
Cool.
So we're reaching our time, but I'm wondering if there's a way we can get started on that template. Like what?
I kind of feel like that's our assignment for the next deal. Like let's build the template in the next session, and just say like, and take our 5 topics and build 5 templates and just say, here's what we want to do. And then we'll, the session after that, we'll start filling them in, sort of fill them in with content, and, we'll build our first set of activities and go from there.
I think that's a good plan.
Awesome.
And just, Amy, do you know if we can make the database a gradable activity or a required activity?
We can set completion criteria on it. Off the top of my head, I can't remember if it is graded or not. I think it can be. I think we can rate entries as well. I'm trying to think. We have Wiki is not graded. Glossary, I don't think is graded. I'd have to think about that one. It's one I don't remember.
Yeah,
I need to find out.
Clearly, it's an underutilized activity.
It is. It is. And in the past, I've used it in a different way. So I used it to have people put in their conference attendance. So as people traveled to conferences, we used to put everything in a paper book, including printouts of a PDF of the PowerPoints that no one ever looked in this book. So instead, we had everybody start putting it in a database, and then you could just go and see what other people had learned at conferences. So I used it as a non-graded activity in the past, but we can definitely look that up.
Super cool.
And even if it doesn't intrinsically, if it's not built in to have grading, we can actually get around that by creating a manually graded item that we put in the grade book, and then we can just give them a rating that way.
Fantastic. Amy, thank you so much for taking time out of your extremely busy day to talk with us here in the office hours. I'm sure that we will see you around sometime soon. Thanks so much. And thanks, Chris. Thanks for your effort.
No, thanks to you. And I don't know, hopefully we get someone who loves databases for our next live session.
Someone who loves templates for our next session. Someone who loves templates. Ciao, ciao.